Our village of Blackwood, nestled deep in the valleys of Northumberland in the year 1888, was a place where time seemed to move at a different pace. The chimneys of the coal mines stained the sky a perpetual grey, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the harsh clang of picks and the rumble of coal carts. Most men, including my father and older brothers, spent their days underground, emerging at dusk coated in soot and exhaustion. For boys like me, Thomas, just shy of 12 summers, school was a brief interlude before we too would descend into the earth. It was a bleak existence, softened only by the rugged beauty of the surrounding hills, which stood like silent giants watching over our dreary lives. Our schoolhouse was a drafty stone building, smelling perpetually of chalk dust and damp wool. Discipline was sharp, lessons were rote, and the future was a foregone conclusion. That was, until Master Elias Thorne arrived. Our previous schoolmaster, old Mr. Pendleton, had been a stern, thin man with a switch for every infraction. Master Thorne, however, was different. He arrived in late spring, a tall, slender man with spectacles that sat low on his nose and eyes that seemed to hold the distant glow of a hidden fire. He wasn't from Northumberland, his accent was softer, hinting at southern cities, and he carried with him not just books, but an air of quiet contemplation that set him apart from the practical, earthy folk of Blackwood. He brought with him a passion for learning that was utterly alien to us. While Mr. Pendleton had focused on sums and scripture, Master Thorne spoke of stars and distant lands, of ancient civilizations and the wonders of the natural world. He didn't just teach us to read, he taught us to see. He had a way of looking at each one of us, all 31 of us crammed onto the splintered benches, as if we held secrets waiting to be unearthed. He would let us draw in our copybooks, something unheard of before, and he would read stories aloud, his voice conjuring images of knights and dragons, of explorers charting unknown seas. He taught us about the birds in the hedgerows, the plants on the moor, and the geological layers that formed the very hills around us. He made the world feel vast and full of possibility, not just a pit waiting to swallow us. My favorite lessons were those he gave on the hills. He spoke of them not just as sources of coal, but as living things, ancient and wise. He described hidden springs, forgotten pathways, and caves that had seen the dawn of time. He told us stories of shepherds who had found lost valleys, of Roman legions marching through the passes, and of the unique, hardy plants that clung to the exposed rock faces. He spoke with such reverence for the landscape that it began to transform in our eyes. The drab, familiar hills became a place of mystery and adventure, a stark contrast to the grim reality of the mines below. He also brought a strange new energy to the school. He encouraged us to ask questions, to think for ourselves, to discuss. This was revolutionary. Usually, questioning an elder meant a clip around the ear. With Master Thorne, it meant a nod of approval, a pause for thought, and often, an invitation to explore the question further. He began organizing small excursions after school, little walks to identify plants or sketch birds. These were always supervised, always safe, and always within sight of the village. But they stoked a hunger in us, a desire to see more, to know more. He would talk about longer trips, about charting the streams to their source, about finding the rare flowers that only bloomed on the highest peaks. These were wild, fantastical ideas for boys who rarely ventured beyond the village boundaries, but under Master Thorne's quiet enthusiasm, they began to seem less like dreams and more like attainable goals. He had a particular fondness for those of us who seemed most captivated by his lessons, and I, with my quiet nature and endless questions, was one of them. He would often speak to me after class, telling me about the constellations, or showing me sketches he had made of rare ferns. He saw something in me, something beyond the grime and the expected fate of a miner's son. He encouraged me to read, lending me books from his own small, carefully packed library, tales of adventure, natural history, and even philosophy, books I would never have encountered otherwise. He spoke of the freedom that lay beyond the confines of Blackwood, beyond the mine shafts, in the vast, open expanse of the world. He promised us a journey, a great learning expedition into the hills, something none of us had ever dared to dream of. He said it would be an unforgettable lesson, a way to truly understand the land that shaped us. It was a promise that filled us with an exhilarating sense of wonder, a beacon of light in our otherwise predictable lives. We, his 31 students, were ready to follow him anywhere. We just didn't know how far anywhere would truly be. The plan for our great expedition was announced on a Tuesday, a day I'd forever remember by the way the morning light, usually so dull, seemed to catch the dust motes in the schoolhouse with an almost magical quality. Master Thorne stood before us, a map he had drawn himself unrolled on his desk. It was an exquisite thing, a network of winding lines and tiny sketches of trees and rocks. He explained that we would embark on a 3-day journey, a grand tour of the Blackwood Hills. The goal, he said, was not to reach a destination, but to learn the land itself, to identify flora, to understand the ancient rock formations, to follow a stream from its babbling start to its roaring conclusion in the river that fed our valley. The sheer audacity of the idea took our breath away. For 3 days, we wouldn't be miners in training. We wouldn't be the sons and daughters of hard labor. We would be explorers. We would be scholars. We would be free. The village, however, did not share our enthusiasm. When Master Thorne went from door to door, explaining his educational trip to our parents, he was met with suspicion and outright refusal. My father, a man whose face was permanently creased with the worry of the mines, listened politely but was firm in his opposition. "The hills are not a playground, Master Thorne," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They are dangerous. Mist can roll in, bogs can swallow a man whole, and the paths are treacherous. My son belongs in the schoolhouse, or better yet, helping his mother, not wandering in the wilderness." Other parents voiced similar fears. Some accused Master Thorne of filling our heads with dangerous ideas that would make us unfit for the mines. The village was a place of known routines and dangers, the unknown was to be feared, not embraced. Master Thorne, however, was not a man to be easily swayed. He returned to the schoolhouse with a quiet determination, his face pale but his resolve unbroken. He spoke to us not of the objections, but of our potential. He told us that true learning could not be contained within 4 walls, and that some fears were born of ignorance, not of reason. He proposed a compromise, a slightly shorter journey, just 2 days, with an early start and a promise to stick to the most well-known, albeit steep, paths. He even offered to bring along a couple of the older students who had some experience with the moors. Still, the parents were wary. Then came the turning point. A letter arrived for Master Thorne from a distant university, a place he spoke of with hushed respect. He never told us what was in the letter, but the next morning, he came to school with a new fire in his eyes. He gathered us around his desk and spoke with a quiet intensity I had never heard before. He spoke of our village not as a dead end, but as a seedbed of untapped talent. He said that this journey, this expedition, was more than just a lesson. It was a demonstration. He told us that he was going to write a report, an account of our observations and discoveries, and send it back to the university, proving that even the children of miners, with the right guidance, were capable of great things. This, he said, was our chance to show the world that we were more than just the coal beneath our feet. It was a powerful appeal, one that spoke not only to our pride, but also to our desperate hope for a better future. When he went to our parents again, he didn't just plead. He reasoned. He promised. He appealed to their hopes, painting a picture of their children not just as future miners, but as men and women of knowledge and opportunity. He showed them a list of our lessons, the plants we had identified, the sums we had mastered. He was a salesman of dreams, and in the end, a few parents, swayed by his sincerity and their own secret hopes, relented. One parent gave permission, then another, and soon, like a crack in a dam, the rest followed. My father, with a heavy sigh and a final, grim warning about the dangers, finally gave his consent. And so, it was decided. On a clear, crisp morning, 31 students, ranging from the eager to the apprehensive, gathered outside the schoolhouse. We carried small packs filled with sandwiches and water bottles. We were not armed with switches or slates, but with notebooks and a sense of boundless, terrifying anticipation. Master Thorne stood before us, a light pack on his back and a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He called us to order, and then, with a simple, quiet command, he turned towards the path that led into the hills. We followed, a small, trusting army of children, leaving the soot-stained roofs of Blackwood behind. The future, we believed, was ahead of us, and it was waiting in the unknown wilderness. The first hours of our journey were a blur of excitement. We moved like a little caterpillar of school children, following Master Thorne up the winding, rocky path. The air grew cleaner with every step, shedding the stale, sooty taste of the village. The hills, which from below had seemed so solid and monolithic, revealed themselves to be a world of their own. We passed through groves of stunted trees, their branches twisted into strange, defiant shapes by the wind. We crossed bubbling streams, their water so clear and cold it made my teeth ache. Master Thorne pointed out plants we had only seen in his drawings, heather that painted the hills in shades of purple and pink, and tiny, resilient ferns tucked into the crevices of rocks. His voice, so often quiet in the classroom, now carried with a new, vibrant energy, and he spoke of the landscape as if he were reintroducing us to an old friend. We weren't just walking, we were learning. He had us sketch the shapes of the hills, the patterns of the moss, and the flight of curlews. We learned to identify the different sounds of the wind, a low moan over the gorse bushes, a sharp whistle through a narrow rock pass. I remember feeling a profound sense of freedom I had never known before, a lightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the heavy air of the mines. We were a class of 31, but in that moment, we were 31 individual explorers, each of us discovering the world for the very first time. Our fear, which had been a constant companion in the village, had melted away, replaced by a sense of wonder so powerful it felt like a new kind of warmth. We stopped for our midday meal in a small, sheltered dell, a carpet of soft grass surrounded by ancient, gray boulders. The sun was warm on our faces, and the food, simple sandwiches and hard cheese, tasted better than any meal I had ever had at home. As we ate, Master Thorne pointed to a distant line of hills, a hazy blue in the afternoon light. There, he said, a quiet pride in his voice, that is where we are going. He didn't just point to the hills, he pointed to a specific point, a small, dark cleft on the horizon that looked impossibly far away. That is the source of the river that flows through our village. That is where we will spend the night. The older boys, who had seemed apprehensive at the start, now looked at the distant mountains with a new respect. But as we continued on, the path grew steeper, and the ground became more treacherous. We were no longer on the familiar trails that bordered the village. We were climbing, and the land was becoming wilder and more unforgiving. The sun began to dip lower, and with it came the cold, and a tiredness that settled deep in our bones. The laughter and chatter died down, replaced by the quiet, heavy sounds of our own breathing and the scuffing of our boots on the stones. It was then that I noticed something strange. Master Thorn was no longer walking with his head held high, pointing out the wonders of the land. He was walking with a focused, almost frantic intensity, his eyes fixed on the distant hills. He wasn't teaching anymore, he was leading. He pushed us faster, urging us to keep up, his quiet composure replaced by a new urgency that felt unsettling. The easy rhythm of the first part of our journey was gone, replaced by the hurried, desperate march of people on a mission. The smiles on our faces had faded, and the air of adventure was being replaced by a gnawing feeling of unease. We were following him, but we no longer knew where we were going, or why. We were just a line of tired, hungry children, following our schoolteacher into a wilderness that was beginning to feel less like a classroom, and more like a vast, empty prison. The sky was turning a deep, bruised purple by the time we reached the high moorlands. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper in the valley, was now a constant, howling presence, pulling at our clothes and stinging our faces with specks of fine rain. The path was gone, replaced by a treacherous landscape of soggy peat and sharp, slippery rocks. We were no longer a caterpillar of excited students, we were a scattered line of exhausted, frightened children, struggling to keep up with Master Thorn. He was no longer walking, he was marching, his long legs eating up the ground, his face a mask of grim determination. He never looked back, never checked to see if we were all still there. He just kept moving, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. Our meager supper of dry biscuits and water was eaten in a cold hollow between two boulders, with no fire to warm us. The laughter and chatter of the morning was a distant memory. A few of the younger children were crying, their small bodies shivering uncontrollably. The older boys, who had seemed so confident just hours before, now looked at Master Thorn with a mixture of fear and confusion. He sat apart from us, hunched over his map, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. I tried to speak to him, to ask him where we were, if we would get there soon. But he just shook his head, a gesture of impatience that chilled me to the bone. "We must keep moving," he said, his voice flat and unyielding. "The night is not our friend." We started walking again, in the inky blackness of the night. It was no longer a journey, it was a desperate flight. The hills, which had been a place of wonder and beauty, were now a monstrous, hostile presence. The wind howled like a banshee, and the shadows of the rocks seemed to writhe and reach out for us. I held the hand of my friend, a little boy named David, my fingers so cold and stiff they were almost numb. I felt a terror I had never known before, a feeling of being utterly lost and completely at the mercy of the vast, unforgiving land. The world was no longer a beautiful place, it was a dark, cold, and hungry beast. It was then that one of the older girls, a strong, sturdy girl named Eleanor, stumbled and fell, twisting her ankle with a sickening crack. Her cry of pain was sharp and clear in the howling wind. Master Thorn, who was a good distance ahead of us, kept walking. We all stopped, our eyes wide with shock and fear, looking from the sobbing girl on the ground to the disappearing figure of our teacher. It was a choice, a terrible, unspoken choice that hung in the cold night air. The older boys looked at each other, and without a word, two of them went to Eleanor, helping her to her feet and supporting her as she limped on, her face pale with pain. The rest of us, a pack of terrified children, continued to follow Master Thorn's distant lantern, a solitary, bobbing light that was our only tether to a world we no longer recognized. The turning point was not a grand moment of drama, it was a quiet, cold, and terrible realization. Our schoolmaster, the man who had promised us the world, was not a guide. He was a man with a singular, desperate purpose, and we were no longer his students. We were his baggage. The trust we had placed in him, a trust born of a shared dream, had been broken, shattered in the cold wind of the high moors. We were alone, a group of frightened children being led by a man who had forgotten he was a teacher, who had forgotten us completely. The dream of the hills had turned into a nightmare, and the promise of a journey had become a desperate, terrifying escape. We were not exploring, we were running. And in the dark, silent hills of Northumberland, we were running from a truth that was far more terrifying than the darkness around us. We were running from the man who had promised us the light. The turning point was behind us, and in its wake came a new, desperate kind of existence. We were no longer on an educational trip, we were lost souls trailing a man who seemed to be losing his grip on reality with every passing hour. We had stopped in a small, desolate cave, a hollow in the rock face where the wind whistled through like a banshee. The cold was a living thing, seeping into our bones and making our teeth chatter uncontrollably. The older boys and girls, no longer just our classmates but our protectors, huddled the youngest children together, sharing what little warmth they had left. Eleanor, her face pale with pain, sat with her ankle wrapped in a torn piece of cloth, her tears no longer a sound of sorrow but of quiet, resigned endurance. Master Thorn, meanwhile, was a man possessed. He had barely slept, spending the entire night hunched over his map, muttering to himself, tracing lines with a bony finger. He wasn't the man who had taught us to see the beauty in the world, he was a frantic, desperate man chasing a ghost. He would occasionally get up and peer out of the cave entrance, his eyes wide and wild, as if expecting something to appear in the gray, unforgiving dawn. He would look at the hills not with reverence, but with a strange, possessive hunger. It was clear to me then that this wasn't just a journey, it was a pilgrimage to a place that held a profound, private meaning for him, and we, his 31 students, were just a part of his mad, obsessive quest. We left the cave as the sun began to rise, a pale, anemic light that offered no warmth. We were hungry, thirsty, and exhausted, a pack of silent, trudging children. The landscape was becoming more and more alien with every step. The gorse bushes were replaced by jagged, cruel rocks, and the ground was a treacherous network of sinkholes and hidden bogs. The fear that had settled in our hearts was now a constant, low-level thrum, a dull, aching presence that was more exhausting than the walking. We were no longer afraid of a monster, we were afraid of the slow, inevitable reality of our situation. We were lost, and our only guide was a man who seemed to have lost his mind. But then, just as the sun was at its highest point, we saw it. It wasn't a village or a farm. It was a single, solitary building perched on the edge of a great, sprawling moor. It was an old stone structure, a relic from a forgotten time, its roof caved in, its windows like hollow, black eyes. The sight of a human structure, no matter how derelict, sent a wave of relief through us. We began to run toward it, a desperate, stumbling charge of children whose hope had been reignited by a single, tangible sign of civilization. But Master Thorn, who had been a good distance ahead of us, suddenly stopped. He turned to face us, his eyes wild and full of a new, terrible purpose. He didn't smile, didn't beckon. He just stood there, a solitary figure against the vast, empty sky, and with a voice that was both a command and a plea, he said, "This is it. This is where we learn the true lesson. The final lesson." His words, so strange and devoid of any context, sent a new wave of fear through me. This wasn't a refuge, it was our final destination. The journey was over, and the real terror was about to begin. My nights became a vigil. After the baker's shop closed and my chores were done, I would slip away to the professor's house, a small shadow in the gaslight-drenched street. The constable had long since declared the case closed, a simple matter of a recluse departing without a word, but I knew better. The house was not empty. I could hear it. The sound, a rhythmic ticking, seemed to come from the very walls themselves, a mechanical heartbeat beneath the silence. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to notice, buried beneath the distant thrum of the city, but to my ears, attuned to its peculiar rhythm, it was as clear as a grandfather clock. My curiosity soon became an obsession. I had to know what was inside. One evening, after a particularly heavy rain, I noticed that a basement window, usually barred and covered in grime, was slightly ajar, its rusted frame pushed up just enough to allow a small person to slip through. It was a clear invitation, and I, a boy raised on adventure stories, couldn't resist. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands, trembling only slightly, pushed the window open. I squeezed through the narrow opening and dropped silently into the dark, damp cellar. The air smelled of old wood, dust, and something else, a faint, metallic scent I couldn't place. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, made out stacks of crates and old furniture draped in white sheets, like silent ghosts. And then I heard it, louder and clearer than ever before. The ticking wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from the floorboards directly above me. I looked up, my gaze fixed on a small, round hatch in the ceiling. It was tightly sealed with brass latches, but from its edges came the faint, familiar glow of that pulsing blue light I had glimpsed from the street. My mind raced. The professor had built a secret room, a hidden chamber that no one, not even the constable, had known about. The sounds and the lights were coming from inside, from a machine or a device that was still running, still working, even with its creator gone. I spent what felt like hours in that cold cellar, my imagination running wild. Was it a time machine? A clockwork man? The thought of what lay in that room was both terrifying and exhilarating. I knew I couldn't get in, not yet, but I had a new mission. I had to find a way to open that hatch, to see what the professor was hiding. The next day, I started my investigation in the only way I knew how, by listening to the adults. Mr. Finch, the baker, was a font of information, often grumbling about the rich folk and their strange hobbies. He spoke of the professor's obsession with a grand device, a machine he believed would unlock the very fabric of time itself. He mentioned a strange, old map the professor had always carried, a map not of London, but of something far more ancient. It was a wild story, but in my mind, it fit perfectly with the man and his mysterious ways. I also learned from the local postman that the professor's closest companion had been his nephew, a young man named Elias Thorne. The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. He was the schoolmaster from a small, isolated village in the valleys, a man who had recently vanished with all of his students. My heart pounded at the connection. Was it a coincidence? Or was there a link between the vanished schoolmaster and the vanished inventor? The thought of two such mysterious disappearances, separated by miles but connected by blood, was unsettling. I knew I had to find out more. The secret of the professor's house wasn't just in the walls, it was in the past, and I was determined to uncover it. My nights in the professor's cellar became a quiet, solitary crusade. I had found my way into the old man's study on the ground floor, a room that seemed to have been frozen in time. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and machine oil, and the shelves were filled not with books, but with blueprints, diagrams, and strange, half-finished contraptions. I spent hours poring over his notes, trying to make sense of a mind that saw the world as a series of cogs and levers. His handwriting was spidery and difficult to decipher, but I began to recognize certain recurring symbols, a stylized hourglass, a winding helix, and a peculiar emblem that looked like a bird in a cage. Among the chaos, I found a journal. It was not a personal diary, but a logbook of his grand experiment, written in a clear, concise hand. He wrote of his obsession with chronometry, not the simple measurement of time, but its very manipulation. He believed that time was not a river that flowed in a single direction, but a solid substance, a malleable fabric that could be stretched and warped with the right amount of energy. He wrote of a chronomium core, a device he had been building for years, a machine that would open a small, stable portal, a doorway to the past. The idea was so fantastical it should have been laughable, but in that silent house, surrounded by the physical proof of his genius, it felt terrifyingly real. His notes were filled with excitement and a growing sense of desperation. He wrote of the immense power required, of the specific, rare minerals he needed. He mentioned a place he believed held the key, a hidden lode in the hills of Northumberland, a place he referred to only as the cradle of time. And it was in these later entries that I saw the name again, scrawled in a frantic hand, Elias Thorne. The schoolmaster. The journal revealed a devastating family secret. Elias Thorne, the schoolteacher who had vanished with his students, was not just the professor's nephew, he was also his estranged apprentice. Thorne had a darker vision for the chronomium core. He saw it not as a tool for scientific discovery, but as a weapon, a device that could be used to alter history itself. The professor had been building a miniature, controlled version of the core, but his nephew, using his own set of blueprints, was building something far larger, far more dangerous. The professor had hidden his work, sealed his study, and had been preparing to leave for Northumberland to find the key to the cradle of time before his nephew could get there first. I sat there, my mind reeling. The two disappearances were not a coincidence, they were the two sides of a single, horrifying coin. Elias Thorne had not just vanished, he had taken his students on a journey to find the chronomium core's power source. He was a man with a desperate, destructive ambition, and he was using the blind trust of innocent children to achieve it. The professor had been trying to stop him, to beat him to the source, but it seemed he had failed. My discovery was overwhelming, and I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. I had to tell someone, to warn them, but who would believe a boy's wild tale of time machines and mad inventors? The local constable had already dismissed the case. I knew I couldn't go to him. I had to find someone who would listen, someone who would understand the truth I had uncovered. And as I carefully placed the journal back on the desk, a faint scratching sound from the wall, a sound I had not heard before, made me freeze. It wasn't the rhythmic ticking of the chronomium core, but a new, more urgent sound. Something was moving inside the walls, and I realized with a jolt of ice-cold fear that the professor might not have vanished after all. He might have just been, in a different part of his machine. The scratching from within the wall grew more frantic, a sound like 1,000 tiny needles drawing across glass. It wasn't the slow, deliberate rhythm of a machine at work, but a hurried, desperate scraping. I followed the noise, my heart pounding, my lantern casting a flickering light on the dark mahogany paneling of the study. The sound was coming from a section of the wall behind a towering bookshelf, a place I had never thought to look. I ran my fingers over the wood, feeling for a seam or a loose panel, but it was a solid, unyielding surface. Then I remembered a line from the professor's journal, an offhand remark about the wisdom of the cuckoo and the subtlety of the pendulum. I looked around the room, my eyes searching for a clock. There it was, a massive grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum swinging in a slow, hypnotic arc. I ran to it, my hands fumbling with the glass case, and found what I was looking for. There was no cuckoo, but a small, delicate brass lever hidden behind the clock's face. Following a hunch, I pulled the lever. With a soft click, a section of the mahogany paneling slid back, revealing a small, dark recess in the wall. Inside was not a person, but something far more peculiar, a life-sized clockwork figure, a meticulously crafted automaton that looked exactly like a miniature version of the professor. It was a marvel of intricate gears and polished brass, its eyes two bright, unblinking glass orbs. It was holding a small, rolled-up piece of parchment in its metal hand. As I reached for it, the automaton's head swiveled to face me with a whirring of tiny cogs. Then, a low, recorded voice, the professor's own, began to speak. "If you are hearing this, my boy," the voice said, its tone surprisingly calm, "then I am gone. Vanished. I have left this behind as my final message, a fail-safe against a catastrophe I could not prevent. My nephew, Elias Thorne, has been a fool. He believes he can control time, but he understands nothing of its true nature. The chronomium core is not a key to a new world, but a lock. And he is about to turn it the wrong way. He is heading to a place he calls the Cradle of Time in the hills of Northumberland, a hidden geological anomaly of immense power. He plans to use it to activate a full-scale chronomium core, a device that will not simply open a doorway to the past, but shatter time itself." The automaton paused, its head tilted slightly, as if in thought. "I had to hide my own work. My research. It is all hidden within the house, sealed with mechanical puzzles and coded keys. Elias believes he is the only one who knows the location of the cradle, but he is mistaken. I have a map, a true map. But it is not on paper. It is in the stars, a celestial chart hidden within a device in my workshop. You must find it. The parchment you hold is the key to my workshop. But a key is only half the battle. You will need a guide. A man who knows the hills as well as Elias does. A man who shares his name, but not his heart." The automaton's voice grew fainter, its gears whirring to a slow stop. It was a final, desperate plea from a man who knew his time was running out. I stood there in the silent study, the rolled-up parchment in my hand, my mind a jumble of fear and wonder. The professor's voice was a ghost, a message from a man who was already gone, a man who had left me to finish his work. I was just a boy, a baker's son from a cobbled street in London, and I had been handed a mission that could decide the fate of time itself. The ticking from within the walls had stopped completely, and the only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. I was now a part of the professor's grand design, and the path ahead was terrifyingly clear.